So I would like to start this online gathering by acknowledging that I'm sure pretty much all of us are on Aboriginal lands around this continent of Australia. I'm on Wadawurrung country out east in a beautiful forest. And yeah, I wanted to pay my respects to elders past and present and really acknowledge the care that has gone into caring for this country all over the continent, and the resistance to the destruction that we have so much to learn from. And yeah, Indigenous people were living localisation, sustainability before my people turned up. So we have a lot to learn as we keep going. So in terms of the agenda, it's a little bit different today because we've had a couple of people sick or not be able to come along. But what we're going to do today is Henry's going to start us off talking a bit about World Localisation Day and resourcing, because the theme of today's session is localisation and the barriers that come up around resourcing. So Henry's going to start us off and talk a bit about that. And then I'm going to jump in and give a bit of my experience. And then we're going to jump into breakouts. So there'll be 10 minutes for you to talk about your own experiences and what's been difficult or what's worked for you in terms of getting resourcing, which is both money and not money resources. And then by then we should have Helena along. So Helena Novak-Hodge is, I think, the founder of Local Futures, has been thinking about this localization stuff for a long time. And so she'll give us a bit of a talk and talk about, localization and resourcing. And then we'll open it up for a discussion with the whole group. So that'll be any questions for Helena, or just, hearing from everyone, questions to everyone like we've done the other few times. And then we'll leave a bit of time at the end to talk about going forward what people might want, because, we originally set up these webinars as a 3-parter, but they've been really great. And, to have so many people coming back. So we have some ideas about what that could look in the future, and we'd also love to hear from you. So that's our agenda coming up. Hopefully that sounds like what will be enjoyable and useful to you. And I'll hand over to Henry.
Thanks, Anisa. Yeah, great to be back with you guys as well. It is World Localization Day on Saturday, June. But the count really, from our internal perspective at Local Futures, the day is just like the kind of flag, the banner, but really it's about encouraging people to identify and celebrate localization all over the world throughout the whole month. So it's like World Localization Day, but it's kind of World Localization Month. And we just encourage people to do events. Of course, we have hundreds of events across continents. People, very much self-organized, just like you or me. Or, the point is to show that the concern with localization is truly international, which can sound like a paradox, but I think it's a good one. And that as we kind of localize, what we're doing is not only paying deep respect to the uniqueness of the places, economies, food systems, cultures where we're situated, but also coming together internationally to raise awareness that the imposition of the global economy is a common struggle. So hence World Localization Day. My brain has been absolutely wrapped up in it for a few weeks now because I've been making a podcast where you'll also hear Anisa as one of the speakers on that podcast, to just try and, again, make visible this movement that is happening all around the world. And so I just wanted to let you know that that's partly what we're tying into today as a campaign, because this is happening in June. So we thought, why not tie this gathering to the World Localization Day campaign as well, which is actually last year. That's how the idea for doing this group got started back in the day. So that's my little spiel on WLD, World Localization Day, and I hope you'll listen to my podcast because I'm quite excited about it. But also on the issue of, something that came back in the survey responses that many of you submitted was difficulties with getting through zoning regulations, or, a housing kind of regulation that might be obstructing a localization effort in your area, difficulties with accessing land or market space, and these are where we come up as grassroots actors. We come up against these structures of the dominant system, which for decades have been making globalization easier and easier, and therefore cheaper and cheaper, of course, with a lot of help from subsidies and tax breaks and all of that. But those regulations, which are taken away from the global players, have often been put on smaller players. And so councils can be really unhelpful in terms of letting things that would be really good for the community and for the land to actually happen. And I'm sure so many of us who've been involved in localization have experience of that. So some of those structural barriers to the localization projects we're involved in, and I think the silver lining of looking at this clearly is just that, relief that of course there are these systemic reasons why localization can sometimes feel like a bit of an uphill battle, and that it doesn't have to be that way. And what a campaign like World Localization Day is doing is saying, let's link hands across borders, across communities to speak truth to power and say, stop making this what makes sense so difficult. And whatever we can do, even at the local level, to link up local projects and encourage a bit of pressure for a bit of help from municipal or council governments. We have had some success with that in the localization movement around, in my area, farmers markets have become easier to set up than they were 10 years ago. Of course, there are still difficulties. In the US, someone on the podcast is talking about local finance being more enabled by, people investing in local finance and community credit unions. That has been freed up in the US. People putting their pension funds into local businesses has become, those changes have been pressured for by the grassroots, and we have had some successes. So that's kind of what I think Helena will also mention. But I encourage you in the breakout rooms to have a think about what are those structural difficulties that you come up against. And a lot of people talk about it's difficult to get people involved. People are time poor. And of course, there are systemic reasons for that as well. So in your discussion groups, have a little chat with others about what those issues have been for you. And then when we hear from Helena, hopefully you'll have questions or specific points to, and they can be general, of course, as well. But hopefully those conversations will help to guide what we might want to ask of Helena, because she has been doing this in Australia for decades as well, specifically in Australia, as well as in other places in the world. So with that, I wanted to say again, thanks for being here. Happy World Localization Day, and pass back to Anisa, who will share her perspective on these issues of the day.
Thanks, Henry. And yeah, unfortunately, we were going to have a couple of people present on their projects, but I guess at this time of year, people get a bit sick because it's getting cold. So instead, you get to or have to listen to me and my thoughts on this. So I've been doing kind of local grassroots activism for about a decade now, and that's both in the kind of climate environment space, trying to work against projects like coal mines and forestry and mining conferences and stuff, as well as building community capacity, local food sovereignty initiatives. And I found it really difficult, the resourcing, especially, when I was young, being a student, getting all excited about activism, and then just watching a lot of people around me, go from having more time in their student days, and then not having as much time anymore because they end up getting a job and that sort of thing. And I've been part of a bunch of different organizations, and while there is definitely some arguments for resourcing through money, so finding money to pay people to do work, because we all do need money to pay our bills and that sort of stuff, I've found a lot more inspiration and alignment with my politics by thinking through how to help people have more time without it becoming a paid job and all of the funding and philanthropy and stuff that comes with that. And so a few of us, I'll put a link in the chat, or we can send it out afterwards. A few of us ran some workshops on how and why to be less employed, and wrote up a bit of a booklet on it to get people thinking through what opportunities do we have in our own lives to be able to spend less time paid work and more time in these things that, we all find so important. And obviously this is different for different for different people. If you have people that you're supporting, that's a very different thing. And it brings up really important questions around class and access to inheritance that, when unspoken in groups, can cause quite a bit of conflict, but it's a really kind of when we think about resourcing, it's a really good opportunity to sit and reflect on, like, what have you had access to? What has helped you be able to be part of these movements? What resources might you have that you might be able to share? And what assumptions are you making about other people and how they can partake? And then, to me, the amazing conversation of, well, what can we share so that we don't need as much money, so we don't need to work as much, so we can do more of this amazing work. And what does that look like? Does it look like sharing houses? Does it look like sharing food? Yeah. Does it look like, using government resources of welfare to be able to pay our bills so we can be a full-time activist? There are so many avenues. Does it look like sharing money, understanding that some of us have more access and some of us don't, and so what does that look like? I've found, there are definitely communities in Melbourne of people that are having these conversations and are living more and more reliant on their community and less reliant on paid work. For me, sharing housing is a particular passion of mine, because housing is often the biggest cost to so many of us. And while, a lot of people live in share houses, especially when we're young, organizing that so it works for people, it's not just a really difficult experience, it's a really regenerative experience. And then also kind of bringing bringing people together intergenerationally. So there might be people who, either inherited a house or worked really hard and end up having a house, and maybe they have some spare rooms. What does that look like to kind of have a conversation with somebody who's doing activism to be able to, offer them a space in your house? Is it reduced rent? Is it exchange for work in the garden? What are the agreements that can be come up so everyone feels okay with this? So although it can seem a bit full on and a bit scary to think about these kind of big changes, although I'm sure a lot of you are probably already doing it and doing it well, to me, that's a really exciting space in resourcing, because it's not only solving the immediate problems of, how to help people have more time to do this amazing work, but it's also practicing the skills that we need as we localize, as we use less, as we share more. So that's my little spiel. Very happy to be disagreed with or critically analyzed. It's kind of just throwing something out there for you to all discuss. Now, we want to put you all in breakout rooms because there's so many of us, and we want everyone to be able to be heard. Hey, everybody. Sorry, we probably cut off some really good conversations. So if you need to chuck anything in the chat to the people you were talking to, feel like I do. But we're trying to get that balance of getting everyone chatting, but also having everyone in the big chat.
So we have Helena Norberg-Hodge joining us. Helena is the founder of Local Futures and, of course, a mother in the localization movement. She's been at it for 50 years. She's the reason why the localization piece of the puzzle fit into place for me, because when I came in touch with her work, suddenly I had a reason to continue caring about the state of the world and a way to act upon it. So she's currently in the UK, near Schumacher College, which she might mention. But yeah, Helen is also seeing over there the all of the energy for the localization movement that is growing from the grassroots, as well as the difficulties in terms of the systemic pressures working in the other direction. So she'll touch on all of that today, and I'll hand over to you, Helena. Thanks for joining us.
I want to say that it is truly remarkable to see localization initiatives continuing to spring up around the world, in every country I know of, despite the fact that our governments are sadly still committed to a completely outdated economic model, whereby they are making fewer and fewer billionaires richer and richer, and fewer and fewer businesses as they merge into giants. They're on a path of merging and bigger, faster, more global. That's what our taxes, our laws, subsidies support. And that includes building up this huge infrastructure, ever bigger highways, ever bigger ports, ever bigger airports. And I'm quite convinced that this is mainly because no one has been forced to step back and look at the impact of the globalizing economy on land, on water, on the living earth, and on people, on cultures, on democracy. But I ended up studying that because of my unusual experience in Ladakh or Little Tibet, where I encountered a culture that hadn't been colonized and hadn't been developed, and they were sort of in another world up on the Tibetan plateau, surrounded by the high Himalayas. The media hadn't reached them yet because it's a part of Tibet that belongs politically to India. So I learned to speak the language fluently and lived with these people and discovered people with the deepest self-esteem and radiant joy and vitality, fell in love with them. I'd come out as part of a film team, but planning to be there for 6 weeks, helping to make a film. But I ended up giving up my job in Paris as a linguist and staying, and then, stayed for a few years. And then every year I was there for half of every year. And then over the years, it became less. And in fact, now this year, I'm going back for the 50th anniversary of my arrival there. And that will be after not having been there for 10 years now. But Henry has been there, and we're having a summit, what we call a Planet Local Summit there at the beginning of September. Some of you might want to join that. Anyone who is really interested in this shift from global to local would, I think, be inspired and rejuvenated by meeting people from around the world who are committed to the same thing. What I'm seeing is that there is still far too little understanding of how we inadvertently support this global system, because we've been more and more essentially brainwashed. And I think really a lot of it has to do with algorithms that have been set to prevent a vision that really supports human well-being and ecological well-being, and that keeps supporting this narrative of progress through more technology, and progress that's being marketed as inevitable and evolutionary. And it's particularly true in the West that people tend to see it as somehow evolutionary and separate from policy, separate from left and right political policy. It's not separate from that, but both left and right have been fundamentally wedded to a path of industrializing, and that has meant monoculture on the land, bigger and bigger monocultures in farming, in fishery, and forestry, and the belief that when we gather from the earth what we need to survive, that needs to follow an industrial model, which when it comes to industrial products like bicycles and cars and refrigerators, they are efficiencies of scale. It does make sense to have big factories and centralized production. When it comes to farming, forestry, and fishery, it's almost exactly the opposite. We could almost say that the smaller, the better. And again, fundamental difference is also the respect and nurturing of diversity. In the industrial framing, standardization, mass production, and creating materials that are essentially antithetical to life, because every last cell of every plant, every last cell in our body, every last cell and organism in the living world is unique and changing and inextricably connected to a whole fabric of life. And that's why Rachel Carson, back in the 60s, warned us about science having already become too mechanistic and reductionist, that we needed a big turnaround in science to comprehend that we can't just create some DDT to kill some insects we don't like, because we're harming ourselves. We are, as all indigenous people knew, fundamentally part of that web of life. And whenever we think that things are separate and can be treated like a machine, we are harming ourselves as well as the rest of that fabric of life. So from the time I started my work in the 70s, people were influenced by Rachel Carson and also by Small is Beautiful. I hope you've heard of that German economist who was a prominent economist in England, and who wrote the book Small is Beautiful. But it wasn't just Schumacher. It was friends of mine when I was at MIT with Chomsky, and there was a group called Systems Dynamics, and they produced the report Limits to Growth. Again, they were showing there's a headlong collision between an economic system that believes in infinite growth and the limits of the natural world. And so we were more or less all on the same page back in the 70s. We needed to decentralize and to question this economic system, and we needed to question this reductionist path of science. We needed a shift. So that is what I had seen in Ladakh very clearly, and I came back to the West convinced of that. And then I think basically I was back in Ladakh every year, and I didn't follow the gradual shift in thinking, which was influenced by big business. And it wasn't, I don't think, evil psychopaths. It was CEOs like Al Gore and some whom I met, and I met someone else he worked with who organized this big meeting in Rio in 92. So even without them knowing it, they were actually shifting the narrative into more narrow, specialized treatment of symptoms rather than dealing with the fundamental issue. So I won't go on much longer about that, except to say that once you see this globalizing path as being the reason behind the multiple crises we have today, then the obvious systemic antidote is the localizing path. And it's a process. And more than anything else, I hope you'll all commit to spending more time on bringing the big picture to people in your area, wherever you're trying to work. We need a critical mass of people to make the projects we try to engage in more meaningful and possible. And so whatever you can do to remind people of the big picture and show them how the systemic path of localizing is reflective of a cultural turning that is global. It's so empowering. I mean, for me, here I am, almost 80, and most of my friends who were activists, as long as I have, are very depressed. And I feel it's because they haven't been so close to the ground and so globally engaged as I have. If I hadn't had all of these points on the map and all of these wonderful people who are engaged in creating alternatives that in many cases, particularly around local food, they so clearly demonstrate both human and ecological healing. So I guess I don't need to sell you on why local food initiatives are the central and most important things to focus on. Henry, do you think I need to talk about that, or should I just more be talking about the problem?
I think a lot of people here have said that in their own words as well over the past few sessions. So I'm sure we'd all love to hear it from you, because we love to have our suspicions confirmed in a way. But I think we all get that.
Yeah. Okay. And again, the reminder, that every person needs food every day, and the insanity of our taxes and subsidies and regulations supporting old processed food from far away, that. And so please don't do what many people have done in the food movement, which is to say to people, if you care about the land and if you care about your health, you should be paying more. Don't do that. Please remind people that their taxes are paying to support the McDonald's and the supermarket, so that we build up both a political awareness and a commitment to supporting this absolutely essential path towards healing, personal and planetary healing, and be willing to pay a bit more, but not being made to feel that that's the only way they can support. For people who can't afford that and maybe shopping at the supermarket, what I prefer is that if they are very time poor and even financially poor, I'd rather they just go ahead and shop in the supermarket, but maybe donate 1 or 2 hours a week, maybe support with a few dollars, something that is a systemic alternative, like a farmer's market, community support, agriculture, a whole array of things that could be done. And so this is also part of what I think we need to be sharing, is that don't feel that you have to be pure and only eat local in order to be an activist or in some way a supporter of a local food movement. It's like what I've tried to say for years, that the corporate think tanks have managed to tell people, if you drive a car, you can't be critical of the dependence on the car. Yes, you can. Drive your car to a community center while you, as a community, demand more bicycle paths or possibly public transport. Even now with AI, I think we need to be very skeptical about the way AI will further a corporate financial casino that is, I would say, evil as a system. I don't think that people are evil, and I personally feel we're not God. We can't stand over people and judge them, and especially people we don't know, but we can see that a system that keeps dividing us from the earth, from one another, and harming our health in a multitude of ways is an evil system. Anyway, that system is unfortunately still supported by both left and right. And so we need to be bringing in the discussion of how it works with the goal of simultaneously supporting the building up of initiatives, little lifeboats that can also be incredibly healing for people to come together. So it can be mentally healing and, of course, literally physically healing as we engage with things like local food movements, but many other aspects as well. But also, if we can raise awareness and get the voices heard, I believe that in the next 2 to 5 years, there is a real potential to have a chorus of voices that is clear and strong enough that we will be able to affect policy. But that means a clear demand for a politics of economic, systemic change away from global towards supporting local. It means taxing and regulating the global corporations, and in many instances, reducing taxes and regulations on local businesses. This whole area is something that, I won't go into now, but I just want to say that discussion about the bigger picture and what the policy changes would need to look like is an important part even of mobilizing people at the local level. Important in Oregon, I started working with some leaders back in the early 90s to promote localization. And we had the beginnings of a thriving movement. We worked with some of the mayors who came in. We had many businesses involved. We had local food. But a few years down the line, after about a decade or so, they thought they didn't need the big picture, and they thought the big picture is too negative. And I really want to say to them now, you, by not sharing the big picture, you did nothing to prevent Trumpian economics. You did nothing to prevent the middle class becoming poorer and poorer. And so now middle class people are sleeping on the street. Yes, we did start some really good local initiatives, but we need the big picture too. So I'm just trying to say, what else can I say? Oh, I know another thing that's a bit frustrating is that very often with men, particularly young men, when they sort of get it about localization, they immediately focus on technology. Money is a technology too. And they always want to scale up. And so they think, local food initiatives that might be started by, a group of 10 people who managed to get a new farmers market started or a co-op. It's all too small. So they're always trying to set up web-based systems, and they are sadly tinkering with blockchain, and I feel confusing and diverting so much energy into, particularly with blockchain. To me, it's a joke. I'm probably offending some of you, but the idea that blockchain is so accountable, the idea that there is complete trust between you and people that you have never seen, you don't know their name, you don't even know where they are. Yeah, trust in algorithms. I certainly don't trust algorithms. And so I think, please remember that the really meaningful human healing comes through human scale, deeper connectedness. So a central part of what we hope you'll do is to gather with some like-minded people, ideally where you live on a regular basis, and of course also on Zoom to broaden the community. But that face-to-face, coming together regularly, engaging in deeper, more vulnerable, real, heartfelt conversation is something that we so desperately need in the West, because we've been driven apart simply through the time pressures, simply through an economic system that's fundamentally competitive, simply through a system that has separated the age group. So we've been traumatized by that separation. And all the time we've had images that tell us, unless we're perfect, we're not going to be loved. So we've got to have a very important job. We've got to have that very nice car. We've got to be very beautiful. We've got to be very intelligent, or we won't be loved. So coming together as human groups to share our deeper, heartfelt concerns, our pain and our joy, this is a central part of the process of localizing, and it can be rapidly very healing. So and if I could also say, one of the lessons from Indigenous culture is that singing or chanting in a group is a wonderful spiritual meditative path that, you may not have the courage. I don't have the courage to lead, but I love that. And I know that in most Indigenous cultures, in virtually every spiritual, that singing or chanting has been part of it, because it is so profoundly healing. And we now know from neuroscience and so on what it does to our vagus nerve. We can actually see how it instills a sense of peace and joy. So I really recommend that if you can get something like that off the ground. But I think maybe now I should take a few questions. Sorry if hope I covered some things.
Yeah, that'd be great. Some questions would be great. Thank you, Helena, as always. And I don't know, Anisa is the person I'm doing this with, and Sarah from NENA, or from Ayla and NENA. But Anisa is with NENA, as well as the Degrowth Network Australia. Do you want to just say hi, Anisa? Because I don't think you've met. And Sarah as well.
Hi, Anisa. What about you?
Love
Yeah,
to meet you.
Sarah.
Hello, how are you, Helena? Lovely to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you. Yeah, I'm good.
That's good. Yeah, sorry, I just had my video off. I was just having something to eat. But that was beautiful. Hearing you talk about the singing and the chanting, I was like, oh, that's beautiful. And thank you for your lovely presentation. It was great.
And
Thank
Anisa,
you.
maybe would you be up for kind of facilitating questions with Helena for a bit and then moving on?
Sure, happy
Sweet,
to
thanks.
do that. Always love to facilitate. So if anybody's got any questions or comments, I always love comments because we're all here bringing knowledge. Then please either put up your hand or chuck something in the chat. Oh, yep, JP, take us away.
Right. So, Helena, hello. First of all, thank you. Just thank you for 50 years of extraordinary contribution. For those of us who've seen your film work, and I highly recommend watching the films that you can find on Local Futures to really get a sense of who we're in the room with. So first of all, thank you so much. My question for you, thank you too for keeping the big picture front and center, because there's so much blame on individuals, as you know, and that's a shell game, because we know that. Anyway, what I wanted to ask from your perspective, from that big picture perspective, after all these years of looking at things, where do you see the trim tabs? Yes, localized gatherings and reweaving our social fabric through things like repair cafes and singing groups and farmers markets, and yes. But like really to shift this idiocy of globalization and the shipping of goods and services back and forth, where do you see the real, where we can make the most impact?
Well, I think the big problem is that no one has been assigned with studying the impact of this big system, or even therefore looking at that as a system. So there's a lot of discussion now about system change, and we all know it's sort of ecology 101, that everything is interconnected, but so little discussion of the global economic system, which is a techno-economic system. And that means we need to look at the path of science becoming more reductionist, more for profit, and being able to question that without arguing that only some kind of, I don't know, superstition or, just totally intuitive knowledge is the only path. We can certainly be committed to testing hypotheses the fundamental principle of science, but question the way it has been more and more linked to profit, but also just structurally over-specialized, and the danger of that linked to techno systems. So please, let's not talk about technology and say, well, a fork is a technology, a shovel is a technology, and we've got technological systems that we need to understand better where they came from, what they've really helped, and we need to look at the link between that knowledge, technology, and economic centralization or global power in the hands of unaccountable banks and corporations. So I think, really it comes back to spreading awareness about how that system works, and without blame. We don't need to blame any particular individual, any particular company, any particular country. For sure, America has been more of a driver of this, but it's, the minute we stop blaming individual cultures, and we're losing the big picture. It's a system that many of us inadvertently have supported. So that, combined with shedding light, which again, this is what we're trying to do, shed light on this, what is actually a cultural turning, a yearning to come back home to more community, to more connection with life. So even a greater, more conscious appreciation of animals, of generally of life itself, a deepening understanding of the relationship between our gut biome and the earth biome. At so many levels, we are making a turning towards nature. And it turns out it's also towards the feminine. So we have a webinar we call Feminine Futures, which is about men being able to reclaim their feminine, and women. Because in the women's movement, too often it was a question of proving we're just like men. There are differences between men and women, generally. This has now become a very difficult issue. But when you go back and look at Indigenous culture, when you look at the bigger picture, this reclaiming of the feminine would actually be extremely healing for all of us. So there's a way of looking at these issues that can really unite us. That's where it will come, and it will, I believe, I'm very pleased that today we had an article in Time magazine. It was actually written with the help of an actress who's been supporting our work, and she's been sort of mentored by me, and she was speaking at a conference in Brazil, and there was someone from Time magazine who said that she could do an article. And so we've got, to get into Time magazine right now is quite significant, but it's very rare. Let's see if this can continue to grow.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have any questions or comments? We're getting into the big stuff now, which is good.
Noni has raised a physical hand, which is...
Oh, there's so many of you that I can't even see. Please, Noni. Henry.
Helena, I listened to you and watched you quite a few years ago, and I was very impressed by your discussion, talking about being in Ladakh and how you felt the joy of the simple living. At the same time, I had been in Bhutan, and I was experiencing something similar. But what I'm trying to cope with in 2025 is that there's 8 billion people on the planet. I don't know what the percentage is of actual livestock that's on the planet, but I've been told it's something like 60% or even more is for our consumption. And these figures are so enormous that they have me terrified. And more than anything, I wish we could work on getting people to understand how we are totally dependent on nature. People just don't seem to. I grew up in a city, so I know that I had no consciousness about my dependence on nature. And I suspect most people who are city dwellers are the same. And of course, nature just doesn't cover what's going into the ground. It's what we're doing to the air. So I cannot think of a worse time in many, many ways to be trying to do what is necessary, which is to return to much more simple living and stopping the massive consumerism that is pointing us where we're going now, which is, I personally think that I may not be alive when it happens, but I'm feeling very, very negative about the future. So I'd like to hear something nice that you can tell me that'll make me feel a bit better.
Yeah, well, one of the things that's key in all of this is that, again, through corporate, very clever think tanks, we are being pointed, first of all, to think that it's our consumer desires, our consumer needs that are driving this system. It's not. The
Advertising for one.
corporate system is pushing consumerism and is pushing it into the furthest corners of the earth and making people who are land-based and have a very small ecological footprint feel backward and stupid. And again, why the conversation, the big picture conversation across the world between, if you like, the more industrialized urban population and the land-based people who are in the billions. You know, in many countries, half the population is still on the land. The wonderful truth, Noni, is that we actually need more people on the land. And the idea that the only way we can have some meat is through these ghastly corporate factories, which are hideously toxic, hideously cruel. But the pictures painted in these films, Kiss the Ground and so on, is that the only way we could have some meat is through that type of production. No, there are many parts of the world where grazing lands have been grazed for thousands of years sustainably. And so we need to also understand that even on a small farm in Australia, you could even have a few cows, if managed properly, that could both produce milk or meat without destroying the earth. But you need more people on the land. That doesn't mean one person per acre. It means we need to understand that the cities, particularly in the fossil fuel era, have been growing and growing into monstrous, resource-sucking, completely unhealthy ways of living. So per capita, when you leave a village in the third world and you go into, whether it's Bangkok or Beijing or Mumbai, your footprint increases exponentially. Everything you need comes through this global system, a lot of it now from the other side of the world. So decentralizing or localizing and supporting villages, smaller cities, and now balancing out so that the bigger cities start to shrink and some of the smaller towns can grow, all the time maintaining a visible, accountable relationship, as you said, Noni, with our dependence on nature. When people see the water, when they see the soil, when they see the animals they depend on, they inevitably act more accountably. Not always, but I would say always. Actually, it becomes almost impossible for anyone to think it's progress to pollute the water, so you have to buy it in bottles. That it's progress to clear cut all the trees. It's not possible. But the scale and the abstraction, the ideas, the numbers of what's happening are so misleading. So actually, I feel convinced that ultimately we will come back to the realization that we depend on nature and that the obvious way of organizing ourselves is in a more decentralized, localized way. We can reduce our footprint while increasing our well-being, while healing the planet. And because this is growing, even people from Mumbai, from Beijing, having gone into the city and saying, what? I thought this was supposed to be some kind of paradise, feeling lonely, feeling ill. They're beginning even in countries where the journey into the city was relatively recent. They're actually beginning to become part of the movement for localization. So I feel more global understanding of what's going on the ground, closer to nature, will help people to feel less pessimistic, to realize that the power in the big system is power we are assigning to fewer and fewer billionaires, to more and more fake dollars. That money in and of itself has no value. And it's literally being created, I was going to say with the stroke of a pen, but no, it's a computer key. It's being created artificially out of thin air. It's not based on any real wealth, but we are giving credence to this artificially created wealth. And we're really up against much less than 1% of the global population. When you really look at the big picture, you have to feel hopeful.
Elizabeth, over to you.
Still
Elizabeth,
muted.
You're muted.
You're muted. You're still muted, Elizabeth.
There we go. Sorry, I'm on my phone, so I couldn't find the button. But
Okay.
anyway, thank you so much. And also, it's really nice to be here with everybody, people who care so much. But my question for you, Helena, is I'm wondering, I think a lot about education and pedagogy in all of this. And, in terms of the efforts to be, to live of localization, what sort of model or efforts do you see with education?
Well, I see lots all over, even in China. Now the Steiner schools proliferating as they realize that conventional schooling has been a training for a job in the city, and that's been a job dependent on fossil fuels and very energy intensive industrial monocultural production, whether it's the monoculture of the pesticides and the chemical fertilizers or the same infrastructure. So there is all around the world, you can see initiatives that realize, wait a minute, we're not learning about the real economy, we're not learning about nature, and it's intensely competitive and unhealthy in spiritual, psychological, and physical ways for our children. And I'm not saying the Steiner schools are multiplying by the minute in China, but they are. And then you see everything from forest schools and just more and more back to nature schools, especially starting with young children, and particularly after COVID. There was a real exodus around the world out of the big city back to smaller villages and towns. And it was clear that it was healthier when there was a pandemic to be in places closer to nature and so on. Some of that has waned, a lot of it probably, but the deeper longing for a different way, including in education, is continuing to grow. So even as we speak now, Schumacher College, which I was involved with from the beginning, an alternative college here in England, is suffering financially, but the amount of love and support and activity that has emanated from that and various initiatives all over the world are still there and are still growing. So, and there's an Ecoversities network. Some of you could see our webinar on that with our colleague Manish Jain and a colleague from Brazil. So what I would say is that I am hoping that most of you will commit to educating people from 18 to 80, not so focused on young children right now, because we're in an urgent situation where the crossroads we're facing are so extreme, and the juggernaut, the global juggernaut, making less than 1%, much less than 1%, wealthier and wealthier, the middle class poorer and poorer, and the poverty is financial and time poverty. That's one of the scariest things, because that goes against taking a deep breath and looking at the big picture. Doesn't have to take that long, but it takes a bit of courage, and it takes a willingness to look at that big picture and realize that if you do that, you will actually feel more empowered, but it can feel overwhelming in the beginning. Anyway, I would say that the education that I'm banking on is that one that can happen through what I call big picture activism, that people in their homes start talking to each other, show the films, and see that understanding the big picture is the most urgently needed education right now. And remember, again, I just want to say with the big picture, it means understanding this global system that was made so much worse through this trajectory of trade treaties. People didn't understand that trade wasn't about a relationship between countries. It was about countries' relationship to Coca-Cola and BlackRock and, Goldman Sachs. That was what was going on. So it was this handover of power from national government to an interlinked global empire that isn't serving anybody, really. It's even impoverishing the nation state. So, and that then leads to a swing to the right, as people who feel impoverished and threatened are only seeing government, and they blame government, want smaller government. So we're seeing this quick swing to the right. Once people wake up to that, we can have such meaningful discussions across left and right, across every issue, the vaccine, climate, politics. There is a uniting discourse there that's very, very empowering.
I'm going to quickly add that we have at Local Futures just released the education section of our action guide as well, which I just put in the chat. So it's a timely question, and we would love to discuss a bit about how this group will continue after these 3 sessions that we've had. So we'll have a bit of an all-in on that. But if there's anything you wanted to end with, Helena, or, we can say thank you so much and see you soon, basically.
Thank you, Henry, for doing a great job. And
Anisa and Sarah so much as well.
Yes, of
Yeah.
course, I don't know. I haven't heard so much about what you're doing, and I think, I just want to urge you to, I should urge you, I always forget to promote our materials. Thank you for mentioning that education section. But generally, we do have so many tools on our website. They're a bit buried. We're not particularly good at promotion, but you will find a lot of useful material there if you dig deeper. And I hope you sign up to our newsletter, where you also get information about new materials. And
that's a good point.
Yeah. So thank you, everybody. And I hope. I'm going to speak at a permaculture conversion, quite a big gathering in Wollongong. I think it is in early October. So if any of you are near there, I hope I might see you there. My friends from the Eco Village, you're not there anymore. No, yes, you are, Rosemary. Yeah, so not so far from Narara, I think. Yeah, so maybe meet some of you there. Maybe some of you will come to Ladakh for our summit in September, first week of September.
It's at our the permaculture convergence is at Kangaroo Valley.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right. That's
Kangaroo
right.
Valley, which is a fair bit south of Wollongong.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Bye.
Thank you so much, Helena. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.
So we want to make sure to get you all to close up the official part of this chat by 8:30, though sometimes some of us hang back because chatting and having, people have different questions and there is so much to chat about. But we've come to the end of kind of our 3 webinars that Henry, Sarah and I just thought, okay, let's try 3, let's see what happens. And I think the fact that there's still, over 25 people here at the end of the last one means that they must have been somewhat successful. And so we've been thinking about what we do next. Do we think that a space like this ongoing, it's kind of like a networking and sharing and learning from each other's space in the localization, in Australia is useful. We could continue with a similar theme where we pick something to focus on. So, building off what Helena was saying, Helena, we could talk about education, and we get to come together and talk about, what has worked with education, what hasn't, or whatever topics that you folks want. And we can have a mix of a few presentations from people who've been thinking about this for a while, some groups that are doing some work on it, and then we do a bit of breakouts, and then we come back together and have a discussion. So that's kind of our proposal we can continue to do this once every 2 months or every 3 months as a space to come together, answer questions. But I guess, we wanted to hear from you all, what is useful? Would you want to keep coming back to a networking space? We don't have heaps of time, so feel free to chuck something in the chat. I'm seeing some nods, so that's the easy one. But JP, what do you think?
Just a quick thought, since there are so many of us here, perhaps to keep it rolling, we can identify our own local heroes to come present. Like if somebody's doing something awesome where you are, because that I think is really where there is so much good going on, but we don't know about it, right? So maybe, and I find, the inspiration crosses the whole planet. It doesn't matter where people are doing the great work they're doing. When we find out about it, it uplifts us. So that was just something that came to me as you said that. I was thinking, you and Henry having to find somebody for every session. We probably all among us know enough people to populate conversations or to spark conversations for the next several years. Just wanted to add that.
Thank you. Yeah, that would be fantastic. We would love, I really perked up at that idea personally. That would be awesome. And there's a comment, is monthly too much? I think maybe it probably is, maybe once bi-monthly or every 3 months or something, or every second month, Yeah,
awesome. And I think as well, like Henry and I think Sarah too, are happy to keep holding this space for a bit. We're also really interested in bringing other people. For me, facilitation is a really important skill that lots of people have, and especially if you're new to it but you want a bit of support and confidence, then I think we'd be really excited to kind of bring a couple more people onto the organizing and facilitation team. So maybe have a think about whether that could be you. But yeah, JP, I love the idea, and just of anybody here kind of sending through ideas of what could be good to discuss. I remember in the first one, I think it was Samantha who put up the idea of doing an offers and needs market. So people might have heard of them before, but they're a pretty cool framework of kind of 2 hours where you get people together and people find ways to share what they've got and ask for what they need. So that's another event that we could put on. I'm happy to work with Samantha to do that as one of our bi-monthly events. And maybe, if you folks have ideas for things that we can chat about. I just find, like so much of the work that's being done in this space through like NENA and Local Futures, there's some really good resources that you can come out to, but the spaces that you can come together and actually talk with other people live are often lacking. So I think that's what we're trying to do in this space around localization.
Yeah.
Awesome. And there's some stuff in the chat about everyone go up to Narara Eco Village.
We've got.
So if anybody sorry, you go, Henry.
Yeah, I was just going to say, with the 2 minutes we have left, if anyone wants to unmute and share their voice and share something they might be taking away or how they might be feeling, I think that would be really satisfying.
Yes, I'd like to say I'm really excited by this app. I've just spent a bit of time looking at it. What's it called again?
Youth Forage.
Forage,
By
yes.
Tianda, who's with us.
Tianda. Yeah.
I
It's
just downloaded it too.
And it's got all the roadside stalls on it and the farm gates and all sorts of things. It would be great when you're on a road trip because you could find the next roadside stall. And I'm sure this must be spreading by word of mouth and people telling each other and listing on there. It's just wonderful.
For just people that want to trade backyard produce, or someone that's got too much stuff growing in their garden and just doesn't want to give it to the chickens, wants to give it to someone that actually needs it. It's trying to build those local networks. I mean, I know there's a bit of a negativity towards technology, but like this is technology, this is facilitating, this conversation and these bright minds. And I just think it's a tool that we can use. And that's what we're trying to do with Youth Forage, is just get the people together. And then once they know each other, they can take it offline and build those communities even more. That's what we're trying to facilitate.
Yeah, well
100%.
done. Great start.
And, the negativity towards technology, again, is that like bigger picture systemic critique of techno takeover. But of course we're, on our day-to-day lives dependent on this, and having an app there like yours sounds like only something we'd only ever support, in this, despite the bigger picture conversation we can have around technology. So
Yeah. I mean, I think, I was listening to Helena talk and saying like that people want to scale up and make it bigger, but I feel like from our heart, that's what we want to see happen. We want these connections to be global, but like local, if that makes sense. We want it to spread to lots more communities and lots more people, and build that connection back to place, like back to where our food comes from. If you can start getting in touch with that, it just brings you back to place where you are, your connection with nature, what's around you. And I think it was NENA that was saying, or Noni, I can't remember now, was like nervous or anxious about the future. I'm so inspired and excited for what the future holds. I see a lot of people gravitating back towards, doing things more simply, living more simply, less consumerism, more local. I see it happening, and I think it's a really exciting time to be alive and be part of that.
That is an excellent note for 8:30 or 8:31 p.m. So thank you. And so anyone who needs to head off now, thank you for staying with us for an hour and a half. I think everyone who logged in stayed with us this whole time, which I'm just like so positive about, because the attrition rate on Zoom is extreme. So grateful for you all being here and staying with us. And we hope to continue to see you in future events and in future gatherings and conversation groups, as we were talking about. Yeah.
And to keep hearing the amazing things that you're doing that you can share. Talking about the tricky bits together. So thanks so much, everybody.